Political parties share many attributes with families, governments, cultures, and every institution that depends on an assemblage of people who promote and aspire to a common purpose. That commonality is the necessity of training and nurturing its progeny and its converts. It is to that cause that you have assembled this weekend, and I am pleased that you have invited me to be a part of those efforts. I want to thank you, those of you who worked for me during the recent campaign for governor, and there were several in your midst who did that. Your tireless efforts and your unfailing loyalty were essential to our success. For the others of you, I will assure you that I am confident that you voted for me. And the reason that I am is a story that some of you have heard me tell about my day of taking pictures, which is usually every day from about 10 until sometimes 12. Several weeks ago, we were running really late, close to that noontime hour, and I had a speaking engagement off of the Capitol Hill area. And I was told that I had to hurry up because I was going to be late. But about that time, a group of middle schoolers who were in the foyer area where pictures were being taken spotted me. And all of a sudden, I was encircled. My escape route was cut off, and I was trying the best I could to explain to them that I just was apologizing that I didn't have time to take a picture with them. And a little girl about 11 or 12 years old, she looked at me and she says, "But we voted for you." I said, "Did you really?" She said, "Yes, it was a straw poll, but you won." So I am confident that you voted for me, and I am more confident every day as I meet people all across this state. I was asked to address several issues today, and the first is the importance of your involvement in the Republican Party of Georgia. As you know, political parties were not embodied in our Constitution. The necessity of unity of purpose that was the strength of our American patriots during the Revolution did not lend itself to enshrining political division in our founding documents. Although our experiment in self-government remained fragile for several decades, after the tenure of President George Washington concluded, the divergent opinions of how this democracy should mature began to manifest themselves in the form of political parties. While the names of those parties have changed throughout the years, it is clear that the institution of political parties has now been grafted onto our tree of liberty. One of the fascinating parts of American history is the role of political parties as they flourish and sometimes disappear. They become the barometer of societal evolution as they modify their platforms to adjust to the issues that are the era in which they exist. I'm currently reading a book entitled Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It is a fascinating study of Abraham Lincoln and his rivals for the Republican nomination for president in 1860. Many of those rivals, because of Lincoln's political genius, became important members of his cabinet. William Seward, Salmon Chase, and Edward Bates in particular. As the title of that book suggests, many of the great episodes of political drama have played out inside of political parties as rivals contend for their party's nomination. Certainly the same is true today. Since the Democrats occupy the White House, much of the focus leading up to the 2012 elections will be on the inside of the Republican Party as we choose among a modern set of rivals. As you know from a review of recent history, especially the elections at the federal level of 1994, 1996, 2006, 2008, and 2010, the American public can switch its party preference with dramatic effect. Our own state has shifted from one that was dominated by the Democratic Party from the Civil War forward. And of course, you know the results have changed, as evidenced by the fact that every Republican running for a constitutional office in the last election was elected here in our state. I believe that the Republican Party has been successful in Georgia and in other parts of the country for several reasons. First of all, it stresses the importance of personal responsibility as contrasted with the dependency on the largesse of government. People are beginning to understand that the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson has led to an entitlement mentality that has failed to achieve its purpose and has burdened our nation with a debt that threatens our national security. The Republican Party has also been successful because it recognizes the importance of a strong national defense and values the role of those who wear the uniform of our nation. As a country that has depended on all voluntary military for 38 years now, we must never allow the fires of patriotism to be extinguished, and the Republican Party has made sure that that has not happened. As young college Republicans, you will identify the specific issues that cause you to be aligned with our party. I challenge you to never take for granted that our system of government is self-sustaining, for it is not. Just as it required personal sacrifice and devotion in its creation, so too does it require the same for its sustainment. I've also been asked today to comment on the importance of young Republicans in my campaign. Signs, phone banks, distribution of literature, dealing with the irritations of the press, all of these were within the domain that young Republicans dealt with in my campaign and on my behalf. Long hours, junk food, that tension with the media, and competition with other candidates. These are the wardrobe of campaigns, and you wore them very well. Now, I was able to carry some of my staff that were on the campaign with me into the governor's office. And I want to tell you that they are displaying the same dedication and excellence that they showed during the campaign. Practically every day, I receive compliments from either members of the General Assembly or the public at large about their competency, their cooperative spirit, and their good humor. And that is a major reason that we have had the successes thus far in this session of the General Assembly. Now, we have dealt with some difficult issues during this session, and I want to touch upon a few. First of all, we were in a posture of having a hole in our budget for 2012 of roughly $1 billion. Now, that is a difficult hole to fill under any circumstance. But working cooperatively with the General Assembly, we believe that the early part of this next week, you will see that budget concluded. It will be balanced, and we believe it will keep us on a path of prosperity. We also had to deal with an issue, though, that is, I'm sure, important to all of you, and that is the HOPE program. As you may know, HOPE is composed of 3 components. It has a pre-K program, which is our universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. We are one of only about 4 states in the country that has such a program, and really will only be one of only about 2 states that will have a full-day pre-K program coming up in this next year. The other part, of course, is the HOPE grants, which deal with those who wish to go to our technical colleges. And then the one that got the most attention was the HOPE scholarships for our colleges and our universities. One thing I think you should understand is that HOPE in its original configuration, and as it was until we just recently changed it, was truly an entitlement program. It was one that was disconnected from the funding source that made it possible. If you want to think about what entitlements are at the federal level, and that's where most of the discussion about entitlements takes place. It is when there is a program put in place that has a life of its own, that is not dependent on whether revenue of government is there sufficient to sustain it, and the government is required to come up with the money to meet those obligations. We were in that posture with Hope. It was tied to tuition. And tuition, as you may know, is something which the General Assembly nor the Governor's Office has any control over. It is constitutionally delegated as a responsibility of the Board of Regents. What we did is decouple it from tuition, and we coupled it with its funding source. And it has only one funding source, and that is the lottery proceeds of our state. We put in place for college scholarships that they would be funded at 90% of the current year's funding level on tuition, depending on the institution in which a person attended. 90%. I know that that is not 100%, and I know there's been complaints about that, but I want to remind you, we still have the richest scholarship program of any state in the country. We also said, though, that if you were in that very top 10%, we calculated this based on current statistics as to who constituted the top 10% of our current Hope Scholars. We call them now Zell Miller Scholars. We found that in order to qualify that category, an individual coming out of high school had a 3.7 grade point average or higher, and that they had a 1200 on their SAT or higher. So therefore we said, okay, we will take that as a criteria for a Zell Miller Scholarship, and if you meet that criteria, then you will receive a full tuition regardless of what that tuition happens to be in our public institutions. Now, there are many other details about the pre-K and the Hope Grant. We have maintained, of course, the basic eligibility for a Hope Scholarship at the 3.0 grade point average. That will continue, and that will be at the 90% level. Now, there are other things that are in the works, and you will see them come to some kind of conclusion over the next 3 days that remain in this General Assembly session. You will see, I think, a package of tax reform that will move us in a direction that many people within the Republican Party have advocated for, and that is moving more to a flat tax approach rather than a traditional income tax approach. Moving away from income tax and moving more toward a consumption-based approach. The package that has been negotiated will move us in that direction. And of course, there are many other issues that remain to be dealt with. I want to conclude today with an observation by the author of the book that I mentioned earlier. And she puts it in the context of Lincoln, who is the primary character in her book. And she says this: as a young man, Lincoln worried that the field of glory had been harvested by the founding fathers, and that there was nothing left for his generation but modest ambitions. But she goes on to say, in the 1850s, the wheel of history turned. The rising intensity of the slavery issue and the threatening dissolution of the nation itself provided Lincoln and his colleagues with an opportunity to save and improve the democracy established by Washington, Jefferson, and Adams, creating what Lincoln later called a new birth of freedom. Therefore, today, as young college Republicans, I challenge you to be alert to the opportunities in your field of glory and be prepared to do your part in your day as Lincoln did in his, to advance the cause of personal freedom and to preserve the right of self-government. That is our heritage, and it is yours to defend. Thank you for having me with you.